The I am the change. I am the change. Barack Obama and the crisis of liberalism, and he joins us now. Charles, good afternoon to you.
Thanks very much. It's very kind of you to have me on, and I join in your admiration of banana pudding.
Well, I think we're building a party here. I think we're laying the foundation for a new movement.
That's right.
The banana.
The question is, shouldn't the government subsidize banana pudding if it's good for you? I mean,
it subsidizes everything else. I don't know why we couldn't get money from the government.
Get some money for that. That's right.
I don't know. If the government gets involved, they'll mess up our recipes. So they'll want to regulate our recipes. So
there may be some strings attached.
That's right.
That's right.
Well, Charles, tell us about your day job, if you will. I want to get into your book, but what do you do professionally?
Well, I teach political science at Claremont McKenna College in Southern California, which is one of the top 10 liberal arts colleges in the country. And I teach American politics, everything from American politics to freshmen to sort of history of political ideas, Plato to NATO, as we used to say. But otherwise, I write, and I'm the editor of the Claremont Review of Books, which is really the only conservative book review in the country, and it comes out quarterly from the Claremont Institute, and you can get a free copy or subscribe to it by going to their website, which is www.claremont, CLAREMONT, .org, O-R-G.
Explain the title of your book.
Well, the title is sort of a play on words. You know, Louis XIV said, "I am the state." And Barack Obama essentially said, "I am the change," back in 2008 when he was running for the first time for the presidency. There's a kind of Louis XIV side to him. As you know, he likes the first person pronoun a lot. And he really thinks that he is a kind of liberal prophet and statesman who is bringing the future to life for the rest of America, and he is the change. He is the prophet of our American future, and he's leading us like sheep into that future.
I Am the Change, the name of the book, Barack Obama and the Crisis of Liberalism. Now, what do you mean by crisis of liberalism?
Well, I think even though Obama got reelected, and so from a certain point of view, you could say, where's the crisis? What I'm talking about is the long-term fate of liberalism. And in the book, I argue that, liberalism is something relatively new in American politics. It really is 100 years old. It came into the mainstream of our political system only in 1912 when Woodrow Wilson won the famous presidential election with Teddy Roosevelt and William Howard Taft as the other two of the three candidates that year. Wilson became only the second Democrat since the Civil War to be elected president, and that's because the Republicans split their vote between those other two guys. But he also became the first liberal in the modern sense, and he is one of the founders of liberalism and also one of its guiding lights. And since then, liberalism has had sort of three big waves in which it has propagated its influence and power and built the modern American state. Woodrow Wilson and the New Freedom, that's the first wave. FDR and the New Deal is the second wave. Lyndon Johnson and the Great Society is the third wave. And then the big question mark was, would Barack Obama succeed in being sort of the fourth prophet statesman of modern liberalism? And he has. But it seems to me that liberalism has faces at least two long-term problems, which, in my view, probably will force it either to go out of business or to radically transform itself. One of them is the fiscal problem, that we can't pay for all of the promises of the welfare state already. With Obamacare, we're going to build a much bigger welfare state, and it's simply going to be impossible to pay for it without massive, massive tax increases on the middle class. And whether liberalism can do that, can face that, is a big question, I think. And whether the American people would tolerate it is also a big question. And then the other thing is there's a kind of philosophical time bomb in liberalism, I think, because it really, as a 100-year-old phenomenon, it's running out of gas. It's running on ideological fumes in many ways. And one finds, especially in the academy, a lot of liberals who don't really believe in liberalism anymore. That is, they don't think it's true, but they do think it's convenient. And it's becoming becoming more of a question of advancing liberalism not as something true, but as something useful to them. And that kind of philosophical corruption, I think, is eroding the foundations of liberalism as a movement.
Professor,
go ahead, Ray.
You used an interesting word to describe Barack Obama, that he sees himself as a prophet. And I was just thinking about a lot of the discussion of the last 2 weeks. You know, he won't compromise. He won't come to the table. He doesn't want to really talk to John Boehner and so on. It just occurred to me when you said that, well, sure, prophets don't compromise. They've got the message from on high, so why should he compromise? Really, the last 2 weeks are perfectly consistent with his own view of history and his own view of himself. Wouldn't that be right?
No, I think you're exactly right. Prophets are not in the compromising business. I mean, he thinks that he represents the future and that his future is inevitable. He's just telling people, warning people what's going to come and preparing them, you know, to march into that future. But he doesn't think it's possible that the future will be different from how he expects it. Very typical of him, for example, was this, you know, during the Obamacare fight a few years ago, he said he may not be the first president to propose a national health insurance plan, but he intended to be the last. And that meant it was going to pass, the time was right, and that once passed, it was permanent. There was no possibility of repealing Obamacare, you know, decisively modifying Obamacare. It is here to stay, and that's still his attitude today, that you can't turn the clock back. You can't shrink the state in any long-term sense. And so for him, you know, the victory is written in the cards, and he acts accordingly.
Talking to Charles Kesler, the book he's written is called I Am the Change, Barack Obama and the Crisis of Liberalism. You know, the liberalism, and you briefly went over the history of it as it pertains to American politics and government, starting with Woodrow Wilson, you said, and then FDR and then Lyndon LBJ, and really what we're talking about here that happened is the expansion of power and reach and control of the federal government over people's lives in the name of, this is interesting, Charles, in the name of, and there may be people listening to us right now who go, well, I like what FDR did, or, man, what Johnson tried to do was help people, and so that's noble, that's American, that's charitable. So how do we assess that you know, the balance? How you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah. Well, I think you have to. You can judge the tree by the fruit of it.
Okay.
And liberalism has always touted itself as practical compassion. You know, that there are people suffering,
right,
and government has to do something to alleviate their suffering. Well, Americans were always, as a biblical nation, or as a nation of biblical religions, has always been committed to helping those who are suffering. But in the old days, government was the last resort, and the federal government in particular was the last resort. If it ought to be in the compassion business at all, that was really state and local government's function. Liberalism has turned the main task of the state into acting in the name of compassion, and in so doing, it has it's justified, the ever-growing cost of government and power of government as necessary to help people. When in fact, I think most people would agree, government help comes with serious downsides, and government, empowering the government to help means empowering the government.
It's destroyed the black family.
Yes, and even the white family is not doing that well anymore. If 40% of American children are born out of wedlock, and that's
that's combined
percentage of them are white.
That's everybody, the general public you're talking about. 73%, 75% of African American children are born out of wedlock.
Definitely, that's right. That's right.
What I mean by that, and I've heard this from black sociologists and historians too. You go back to the 60s, and a lot of LBJ's programs, welfare programs, meant to help people, including the African American community, poor people who had it, living through the civil rights movement and everything else, turned out to be counterproductive because, you see what, the black family was intact then. Now it's been decimated, and a lot of it's due to the, as Bob Beckel said, liberal on Fox News Channel, the well-intended programs of liberals back in the 60s.
Mm-hmm. No, that's right. And, the actual good that government has done or can do is very limited. But liberals don't like to acknowledge that that government can be a threat to freedom, and not just a useful way to dispense benefits.
You know what this reminds me of? It's the classic, if I can use this example, enabler. Okay, mm-hmm. you ever seen an example of a parent dealing with a child, and instead of dealing with the problems with the child, they give the child money, or they give them things, or they help them, and you go, well, this child needs to be disciplined. They need to learn to take care of themselves. And the parent goes, "Don't you have a heart? Don't you have a heart? I need to help this child. I'm the parent. I need to be, kind and helping you." You're going, no, you're only leading them to a life of dependency, of people bailing them out all the time. And we call that, whatever the problem may be that the child has or the person has, we call that someone who enables the person. And the enabler does so, they'll tell you with love and compassion and the best interest at heart, but we know that ultimately that's not true. That's what the federal government has become to a lot of us in America. They become our enablers, and we can't pay for it anymore. You mentioned the price tag that comes with liberalism. We had Senator Rand Paul on last hour, and he was talking about how the federal debt's going to $17 trillion. That's with a T, $1 trillion, which can never be paid back. I don't see how it'll ever be paid back. So we're headed. We got the printing presses going full speed. The money printing presses in Washington going full speed, and then the Federal Reserve is trying to, keep us from having a big bad fall. So liberalism works, I guess. As long as we have printing presses for money?
Yes. Well, most liberalism works as long as the federal government has a lot of money. And until fairly recently, the federal government was awash in money. I mean, back in the 1960s, it was coming in faster than they could spend it. And that's one reason why they spent more and more and more of it. They counted on the good times always rolling. But right now we're entering a different kind of politics because, as you say, there's $17 trillion in national debt, and the expenses of the welfare state are only going to increase inexorably. There's increasingly going to be not enough money to go around. I mean, we're borrowing, $3 of every $10 right now that the federal government is spending.
And maybe you don't know the answer to this, but